Hello, I'm Philippe Etienne. This talk is about the human factor, our relationship with nature. This topic may sound quite intellectual at first, oriented as we are from a mechanistic framework to look more basically at the technicality of things. So, for instance, in forest gardens we may want to look first at how plants grow, how to take care of them, soil, weather patterns, all sorts of practical knowledge. And then the material needs and capacities of the people who interact with the garden obviously appears important. And then there's another layer, the level of, probably we could call it metacognition, in which we observe our beliefs and behaviors from a broader perspective. This is what we are going to do. The human being is a deeply cultural animal. Words, symbols and ideas are part of and influence and determine our experience of the world and our actions. There is a bit of a loop effect here, because culture, the way we think, is central to the operational gardening practices, which in turn shape back the culture of our society. Relationship with nature. It will make sense to look at the qualities of this relationship. We could list them and evaluate different aspects of them. But there is probably a deeper question, which is about the very existence of this relationship. Relationship requires distinct entities, and this is crucial to the unfolding and the understanding of the current crisis, in plural, that we are facing, and in which forest gardening can bring solution and provide a model. So let's take a quick look at the etymology and definitions of nature. The word comes from a Sanskrit root jan, and the general sense revolves around generation and existence. So from Sanskrit it went into Latin, the verb nascere, to be born, natura, generating force. It then came into Old French and obviously into English. And nowadays, if we look at the different definitions, we can kind of group them into four different main types of definitions. One is the essence or inherent features of something or someone. Another definition is about a creative force. The third one will be all that exists, the universe, the world. And getting strangely away from the original sense of generation and existence, with a little twist, comes definition that is all except from humans and their productions. And this last definition is the one that may require more attention, because it may be a bit problematic. So let's turn to anthropology. Philippe Descola, in his book Beyond Nature and Culture, first published in 2005, provided a new mapping of worldviews according to similarities and differences in physicality and interiority. So basically it's four distinct ontologies, ways in which people experience the world and relate to it. These ontologies are animist, totemist, analogist, and naturalist. I will not get into the details of the first three ones, but it's important to acknowledge that they exist and they are fundamental for other societies, other than ours. But for us, for the modern Western world, our worldview is mainly that of naturalism. Naturalism not because we are close to nature, but because we do have this idea of nature. So the scholar describes this as a great divide, an anthropocentric dichotomy, in which despite a common ground that we find with other aspects of the world, other parts of the world, in which we recognize a common physicality, a common material existence. We are built of the same materials. On the other hand, we tend to separate ourselves from the rest of the world based on a difference in interiority. Humans, on one side, are subjects supposed to be gifted with an inner life, reflexive consciousness, free will, a soul. And this is contrasted and opposed to nature, to which we deny interiority. Therefore, it is things, objects. So we have invented nature as a separate object. And this is not so old, but we can find some root or testimony of this in the book of Genesis, in the tale of the creation of the world. But this ontology, our ontology, doesn't make sense for other societies. However, we made it real for ourselves and we built it into the real world, into the material world. And caricatural and eroding as it is, we still use it very commonly, even if we don't always realize. We still somehow, even if we don't subscribe to this ideology, we may still have it underlying our ways of thinking, and it's a very deeply rooted part of our belief systems. And in this dualistic perspective, it's very easy to worship or demonize one side or the other, whether be it nature or humanity. This brings us to the notion of separation, which has different aspects. It can be vital and useful. Obviously, immunity is necessary for the survival of individuals and species, and this requires the ability to discriminate self from non-self in order for species to protect themselves and flourish. And then we have a pathological or harmful side of separation, which is not so good, and which we can find, for instance, illustrated in psychology with dissociation, which is useful in the first place when a person needs to protect himself from trauma, but then in the long run it becomes much less functional, much less interesting as a way of functioning. For the social animals that we are on a different level, exclusion is not trivial. Exclusion from the tribe is a death sentence, or was a death sentence, because we don't live tribally so much today. But this is still true in our neurological programming. And generally speaking, problems arise when, or that's my understanding or belief, if you will, when the feeling of separation is stronger than the sense of belonging or wholeness. Now, another idea in anthropology which I'd like to refer to was brought about by Claude Lévi-Strauss in 1959, and it may be just useful as a metaphor, but its value is very interesting in that way. It's the idea of cold and hot societies. And this is not a clear-cut division. It's not black and white. But basically the idea is that cold societies, typically those of the gatherer-hunters, values mainly stability. They are able to adapt and change when faced to circumstances, but stability is more valued, and so they tend to change less in their practices and the way they tell their story about themselves. In hot societies, which is illustrated by the modern Western world, and which first appeared in the large city-states of the Mediterranean and the Far East, change is more valued than stability, and it becomes a prominent feature of those societies. And obviously one type of society can use the other quality, but there is a sort of dominance of one character above the other. So looking at physics, warmth is characterized by an agitation of particles, which takes us to the idea of inflammation in the more medical sense, and also looking at the current situation, which looks a lot like a flash in the pan when we look at the evolutionary scale of time. The way the world is going now is an extremely sudden change. And in our society, innovation has become a new idol. We do things just because we can do them. It's become a high value, and our civilization may consume itself because of this obsession with novelty. And this intrinsically conflicts with any sort of sustainability. So this brings us to a big paradox that we are facing today, in which we both need to change. We need to change fast. We need to adapt, to be reactive to the situation, and we also need to cool down. We need to decrease agitation. Agitation is not a solution to the problems caused by agitation. This seems obvious, but I think it's worth paying some attention to the terms of this paradox. So there are many also interesting points to discuss in this topic about our relationship with nature. But I will conclude with the idea that culture is both an input and an output in forest gardening, and it requires our attention in the same way as other components do, our full attention. Also, nature as separate from humans is just a point of view amongst others, not the only one. And it's probably not the best one to hold on to in the current situation. This very point of view is somehow insidious and needs to be recognized for what it is, even in our own minds and daily practices. I think we need to reintegrate, and we need a cultural cooling down. And the great thing is that this is just what forest gardens offer and allow by infusing their core principles outward into our societies. Thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.